Yeah, so the next section for us is how to prepare for change from paper to digital platform. So you've all mentioned a number of times about champions within the organization. So I mean, at the start, like how do you get them? What part do they play in it for you?
So a lot of times those champions are the ones who are bringing the idea to the table, and working to champion the idea, so to speak, of
Yeah.
moving from a paper-based process or a more manual process to a digital process, and you work through that by getting leadership buy-in, by presenting a valid business case that's going to show a decent amount of return on the investment and improvement in the process, a decrease in compliance risk, like all the important factors that your facility would have. And maybe money isn't the most important thing. I've worked with customers where time to market is more critical to their management team than the cost savings themselves. So being able to reduce the overall capital project length of a project to build a facility that's putting a new product on the market by a couple of weeks has a bigger financial impact to that customer than um, the small savings that you get from the efficiency gain on the validation tool. So it really, those champions need to identify what's important to the facility and build a business case around what is that system bringing that impacts those metrics.
Yeah. So in your role, John, when you've dealt with customers over the years, if I was working at a pharmaceutical organization and I wanted to go digital, what do you think would be the most important couple of things that I should go to a senior leadership team with?
It's easier now, I will say,
Yeah.
because the world is has an expectation of digital, right? With every leadership team wants to do something with AI or data management or big data analytics. Like those topics are things that almost all leaders are familiar with because we're uh, bombarded with it in the media on a daily basis. Like that's the
Yeah.
future. So being able to convey to them that this is a foundational digital system to be able to move into the future, I think is probably something that resonates a lot now. You're still going to have to justify it from a cost perspective, and that's where the efficiency gains, the reductions in time, come into play, and those become very important. Typically a validation system like this, you're using the success and case studies from the vendor and trying to calculate what your reduced costs are going to be on a particular capital validation project or overall in the life cycle of your validation team. Like I said before, most of the time those savings can offset the cost of an implementation, with a decent sized project or just, through a decent sized amount of, annual validation burden for a team. Like it doesn't take a ton of work to offset the, 100 to $200,000 implementation price that most facilities see for one of these systems.
Yeah. So, Chris, in your role, like day one, when you get on to an implementation, what are some of the first questions that you're asked by senior leadership about moving over to a digital platform?
Yeah, so we've kind of covered some of those topics already. Training is always a big one. So, like, how much training is going to be required here? How many people do we need to get trained up as SMEs? Like, can we do this with a limited number of SMEs? They'll be asking about flexibility of the system. Like, if we get this set up by the vendor, so if the vendor is going to set this up out of the box for us, how easy is it for us to configure thereafter? Can we add to it? Can we build, additional sites in if we need to, and all of that kind of stuff gets asked. With regards to the implementation itself, the timeline is always a huge one. How quickly can we get this up and running? Like, the solution itself is validated. Okay, so it's ready to go. It might not come out of the box ready to use, but the solution itself is validated. what work do we need to do now to validate the processes within it? How do we manage change when we've done an implementation is another thing that they'll talk about. And the key here, I suppose, is that a lot of the vendors will have various partners who support the solution. So they'll have partners who are certified by themselves to help with implementations, help with ongoing support. They'll provide resources that can, provide you SMEs. Like, you'll have an SME who is an SME in the digital validation solution, but they'll also could be a C&Q SME, they could be a computer system validation SME, and they can be the client's champion then, so there's partners who provide that level of service as well. So all of these things are typically, what you'd see when you're coming into an implementation. The other thing then obviously is how easy is it going to be to keep this running on a day-to-day basis, like after the implementation is done, how user-friendly is it going to be? So I think we've covered a lot of that in other areas already today.
Yeah, so that part was just about, when you're preparing your organization to change, if you're looking to build a business case, that's probably a couple of really, really good points of where you should focus your energy when you're going to senior leadership. So the next part here, and Joanne, maybe you'd like to get in on this one, is like assessing the current workflows of the business as they move over.
Yes, I think that's a very large consideration, particularly of executive leadership, because again, I'll say time is money, money is time. And so everyone wants to know what will the effort be to lift this not only for implementation, but to move through the execution and then on an ongoing basis. So it's recommended that a workflow analysis is performed so that you can identify handoffs, identify exact processes that are in place currently with your organization. You can therefore look for potential inefficiencies, areas that could sort of bog down the process, or areas that you can actually utilize this new digital platform to speed things up. And that's where you'll get the most bang for your buck, the most value from this activity. So I think that that's a very large consideration as well, is how exactly will we utilize this and how do we work this into our processes. And always there will be consideration for creating SOPs, procedures, and documenting them in the quality management system so that the way of working is memorialized and can be trained to, and people understand the expectation and the way things should be. And that also drives accountability for work, for the way that the work is done. So I think all of those things are important, but it starts with an assessment to see exactly how are you working currently, how do we want to work in this new system. Those things help you. That sort of breeds the next look would be looking at what potential success metrics would be. How do we know that we are doing well with this? How do we know that we are efficient? How do we know that we are compliant? So all of those things, all of those success metrics should also be considered, identified, and then figure out a way that you can utilize the tool itself to report back on those things. I can say that many of the digital solutions do provide integrated reporting tools. So that is always very beneficial. So you can say, how are we doing right now? Where are we right now in this process? So those are all really important things. But understanding what your success metrics are, the key performance indicators, and how will you track them might be a next step after that.
Yeah, with that, what are some of the common ones when you're speaking to a senior leadership team? What are the common success metrics that they like to look at?
Mm-hmm. For sure. Well, I would say that time of document development, like break it into stages. The time is the most important thing to track because that is where you probably see the most initial value, is that you are saving time, you're saving effort, you're therefore saving money, I guess, in your spend and the way that you do the work. You can also track deviations, for example, and the way that how many errors were made previously in a paper with a paper solution versus your digital solution. That would be another key performance indicator. I would also say perhaps that the number of users that you have may also be a way of looking at a key performance indicator. The more people that actually get value out of the system helps you to determine that the system is, of course, of value to you. So maybe it's not the number of users, but the ways, maybe the platforms within the solution are being used, the workspaces, maybe the more workspaces, the more ways that this is used help drive that determination as well. One of the questions in the chat next is about audit findings, and I would say that that is also a way of determining value for these solutions, is how you address your audit situations or audit readiness, even if you are in a mock audit. And each of the solutions does have, because this is, compliant is the way to go. It's probably the driving force, I would say, that it must be a compliant solution. And so therefore we think about the regulatory authorities and how they will view this and how they would come to see your GMP documentation or your documentation of record in an electronic solution versus a paper solution. So many of the key providers of these solutions do have audit I don't know if a collection is one word that comes to mind. One of the manufacturers, Neat, I believe, calls them collections, and so you can segregate some of the documentation in PDF format, and based on what the auditor wants to look at, what they request, and so that is what they can see. They have just a collection where they have a view-only repository of the requested documentation. So that's one thing, but I know others may have more to add about the audit findings and how that works out with a paperless solution.
Yeah. So I would have one recommendation with regards to audit. I suppose scenarios when you're dealing with a digital validation solution is you can always assign a representative who is responsible for showing the auditor what they need to see. So I would always advise against, providing the auditor with an account with access into the system. There are certain solutions, obviously, that have, accounts that are very, very specific permissions for areas where you can stage documentation. But if you don't have that available to you, rather than providing an auditor even with view-only access, provide them with a resource who has access to the system, who's trained to use the system, because that could be something that could become an audit finding. Is like, okay, you've given me access to the system, but I'm not trained to use it. So if you provide them with a resource who's trained, who has access, they can take them to what they need to see within it. And then you're maintaining the control as well. So it's not that you're trying to hide anything from the auditor. You're making sure that the person who's navigating through the system is trained to navigate through the system. They have an account, and the account has been granted to them in accordance with your procedures, because the majority of the clients that I have worked with will have procedures outlining how you get access to the system, what training you're going to need for the different access levels and all of that. So I found that works quite well. There's a lot of advantages when you think about an audit scenario with regards to the digital validation solutions. Like if we think back again to the world, you're going and you're getting protocols and documents, trying to find them. As John said earlier on, you're putting binders into locked cabinets, and maybe somebody has it in their desk for whatever reason. They've taken it away to check something during a periodic review, and then you're trying to hunt down that document. The other thing then is your war room. So you take a document in there and somebody finds Post-its inside in a paper protocol, and that's a big no-no. So you've all this I suppose stress and hassle of sorting out those issues before a document is ready to go in front of an auditor. Whereas within your digital validation solution, you're going to have a level of comfort because there's going to be no Post-its because it will be on the screen versus on a specific document. You'll have your full audit trail in there. You will have a level of comfort with regards to, again, not having GDP or Alcoa++ issues found during an audit. And then there will be, the likes of the hyperlinking, again, hyperlinking and cross-referencing. if an auditor comes along and says, "Oh, this particular test in your IQ is testing what requirements," you might have the requirements cross-referenced directly within the test case, and you click on the link and you show them there's the requirement, and that then kind of puts the auditor at ease as well. They'll say, okay, these guys have this in control. The other thing to consider is the fact that auditors are now obviously becoming familiar with these solutions, so it will be the norm. It's not going to be a case of, oh no, how am I going to deal with an auditor now that I have a digital validation solution? It'll be more so of, Jesus, is this auditor going to be annoyed because we're in paper?
So you don't have to explain to them that you've breached a bit of GDP because your post-it note lost its stick, and that's not in the binder
Yeah.
anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. And this person's terrible handwriting. That word is, I think that word says qualified.
Yeah. But so the next part here is staff involvement and engagement. So which different departments would you need to get involved to get their input just to make sure that this platform works for everybody?
More, I suppose, engagement across departments, the better. Because validation documentation goes across all departments. Like, you could have a URS that will have, and I know I'm going to shoot myself for saying this, but you could have a URS that will have 7, 8, 9, or 10 approvers. Hopefully not, but there are situations where you could have that, right? So you could have a URS for a piece of equipment that's going to have quality impacting requirements. It might have CSV requirements. It could have automation requirements. It could have engineering. It could have health and safety requirements. It could be a system that is kind of shared ownership, right? So I've seen on certain sites where they have a CIP skid or a CIP system where the skid is owned by maintenance and utilities because of where it's located, and the distribution loops, because they're serving your manufacturing equipment, that side of it is owned by manufacturing. You won't have a separate URS for generation versus distribution. It's typically covered in the single URS. So in that scenario, you're going to have a quality approver for the quality impacting requirements. You're going to have a CSV approver for the CSV requirements. If automation is separate to CSV in certain companies, you'll have an automation approver for your automation requirements. You'll have somebody from engineering approving for the engineering requirements, somebody from health and safety approving for the health and safety requirements, somebody from maintenance approving because they're a maintenance system owner, somebody from manufacturing approving because they're the manufacturing system owner, and you could have validation, and then you might have your auditor, right? So there's nine approvers in that scenario, right? So if any of those stakeholders from a different department are not involved and haven't been, I suppose, engaged in the implementation, you're going to get to a point where it becomes very, very difficult to proceed, because you'll be looking for somebody to approve a document or support execution of a document. They won't be trained, and then you're in a panic again, trying to get somebody trained up. That department is trying to identify a resource who probably has lots of other work that they need to be doing. Whereas if they're involved from the offset, they're going to see the benefits. And I have seen it with different clients where you start off using your digital validation solution for commissioning qualification, maybe, and then somebody from automation gets wind of this tool and they're like, actually, you know what? We have certain design and test documentation that we think could slot in here very, very easily. You might have somebody from maintenance come along and say, we have some forms here that we fill out on a day-to-day basis, right? So if they're coming along and they're taking a piece of equipment and they're performing certain checks, they might say, there's no reason why we can't put this form into the digital validation solution. Quality might have other, processes that they could put in there. And that's how the use of the tool grows. And when the use of the tool grows, your return on the investment obviously grows with it. Of course, you're going to have, not of course, but dependent on, I suppose, your licensing agreement, right? So some of the solutions providers have only one type of license, and it doesn't matter whether it's executor or view only, administrator or whatever. The license is a license. In that scenario, you're going to have these people in the system as reviewers and approvers anyway, so that's a license. If they're going to use it for execution for whatever solution they're going to be needing it for, it's a license that's already being used, and you're getting more benefit of that license. So the stakeholder involvement and engagement is huge. Like you're kind of, it's like I suppose a circle. Like you're growing the use of it, you're growing the benefits of using it, and your return on your investment is growing all the time then as well.
Yeah. So we've got a question here from Juan, and he's asked, what new roles, i.e., changed responsibilities, are needed in an organization that are implementing a paperless validation system?
I think realistically, the champion is kind of the main one.
It's a big one. I mean, you're going to need some IT involvement and support as well, right? Somebody's going to have to maintain the system, administrate it. You're going to have those technical experts. The champion may be your process technical expert as well, and in a lot of cases they become like a business process owner and help define how things and workflows are built out within the system, where you need electronic signatures, all that piece. But you'll have to have some resources that are trained to a higher level than just your standard end user. And Neat in particular, those are called power users. I think there's a similar level in most of the systems where you have people who can create templates, who can assign different workflow processes, etc. So it's an enhancement of skill set for some users. As far as new roles, there's only a few. The champion is probably one of those. It's maybe a little bit more critical, so it's a role in and of itself. A lot of the change is just upskilling of your resources that you already have. And then, like I said, on the IT side, you're going to have to make sure that you have somebody who can manage the system and do all of your user account creations, and make sure the data security is there, and the other things that you need to do from the technical side.
So on that, John, is it the IT department that you'd need to get on board for the data migration to plan that?
A lot of times, I mean, you're going to need quality too. The data migration, you got to understand what you're bringing over and what you're coming from, right? If you're in an existing electronic system, it's going to be a different data migration than if you're currently in a paper-based system. A lot of the customers that I work with are currently in paper, so basically you're just kind of cutting off in that paper. Some of them have chosen to scan and create true copies, so to speak, of those paper documents, and they do pull those into their electronic system so that they have an easier way to access that documentation going forward. But that can be a pretty big effort if you've got years of historical data to get scanned in and then upload those. That has to be done. You can do some data migration processes if you've already got it scanned and it's in a shared drive folder somewhere. You can pull that and mass import it into most of these systems. But the scanning of the paper to getting it into electronic will take a lot of time.
And how do they integrate with existing systems like LIMS or ERP systems?
They can, through those open APIs, there's a lot of ways that you can integrate. Like you can share data between the two. You can share between, say, a CMMS or a maintenance management system and a validation system. You can share like status flags, the ability to call out a product or a asset as being on hold, or in a validated state, or ready to use, or some things like that. So there's a lot of different data that you can share between the systems. I've seen process validation systems set up to where they're grabbing data from a LIMS system and pulling it directly back into process validation protocols. Out of the box, most of these systems will just give you the ability to make those connections. It's really up to the design of your system and what you have as important to your overall process that will dictate what data and what information is shared between those systems.